Okay, it's 6:03. I guess we'll get started. We end a little bit early today, probably around trying to end by 6:45, 6:50. The demonstrations have been called for 7. All the restaurants, everything else is closing in Tel Aviv as of right now at 6 o'clock. They were all closing. Um, the labor union has called a general strike tomorrow morning. The airport will be closed starting tomorrow at 8 a.m. Um, Everything else will be closed in the country at least for 24 hours. Will it do anything? I don't know. That's the reality. Um, I can't say how hard it is to summarize the feeling um, that I and almost everyone have at this. Uh, I wrote what I wrote for tonight. Walking this morning, walking my dog. It's the first day of school, and usually the first day of school, you see all these happy families. They don't take their kids to school. It's a really big day. Leaving aside the high schoolers who weren't going because there's a spike of high school teachers, which is a whole other story. Um, there weren't any smiles on the streets today. No parent. Children was trying to smile. Children were laughing at children. They should laugh. But there were no smiles on parents' faces this morning. Nowhere's that none of them that I ran into this morning. Um, it's a feeling of helplessness, complete helplessness. That feeling began Thursday night with the government decision that turned Philadelphia into our bastion, the place that we can't leave ever. God knows why. And some people are actually buying that line, and which clearly um, was an addition to the original peace proposal, and clearly, by all accounts, Hamas is not going to accept. Um, and Even then, it was clear that what Netanyahu has been doing all along, most people have been saying it for quite a while. He does not want an agreement because an agreement, regardless of what agreement, any agreement will result in the release of terrorists with blood on their hands. And Smotrich and Ben Gvir have stated very clearly that if we release terrorists with blood on their hands, they will leave the government. It's one of Smotrich's other ministers, Strzok, has said that if we leave Philadelphia, they will leave the government, which was a new demand of hers in July. So it's quite clear that the only thing that's been driving Netanyahu's policies relating to the hostages has been his uh, continued premiership, his fear of losing his coalition, which he would do if there is a hostage deal. And of course, that is, it makes everything so difficult. This tonight for the first time, the expectations, and I'll write about it later because we'll see whether the expectations are met. The expectations that this will finally turn out the crowds that have not been turning out until now. There are signs of that all over on the streets. There is a general realization that what we're talking about is just Netanyahu. However, to be honest, he's managed to convince people along the way that I had an argument last night with somebody who says that we can't leave Philadelphia because when we were sitting on Philadelphia, we there was no um, there was no smuggling going on. It only started after we pulled out. I tried to explain to him that first of all, smuggling in Rafah began at the beginning of the last century. Smuggling between the Egyptian side and the Ottoman side of Rafah is something that's been going on for the longest time. It's an industry of Rafah smuggling. And then I went on to say to him, how did they get Qassams, missiles to fire on Sderot before we pulled out? Well, here's the belief before we pulled out, there were no missiles on Sderot. Now, I knew, remembering from back then, that there were plenty of missiles on Sderot. He didn't believe me. And when I finally showed him statistics, he says, I don't believe statistics. There were, by the way, 200 and something Qassams fighter they wrote before we pulled out. There were more after we pulled out, don't get me wrong. And the biggest mistake we made after we pulled out was I said before we pulled out, once we pulled out, we could then, flatten Gaza if they fired at us. Of course, that then didn't end up being the facts. The world wouldn't allow us because, hey, we never can do that. They can fire on us and we can never fire back because we might kill some civilians. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of killing civilians, but this is the reality. It makes it almost impossible. And that's one of the reasons why we ended up where we were um, because they were firing and we couldn't do much about it. So before this war, I suggested for every time they fire one missile, we should kill one Hamas person. But that wasn't the way Netanyahu was going. He was going to give them money and everything else. That's a different story altogether. But that was my view. But one rocket, we kill one person. We don't fire on empty buildings. That was just stupid, a waste of time. We kept on. There must have been more empty buildings we destroyed in the years between between our fights in Gaza. We should just kill people. I'm sorry to say, Hamas people, not innocent civilians. But leave that aside. This is so, that was last night. That was before the terrible news. Though last night already we knew. We didn't know the details. We didn't know who it was, but we knew there were 2 women and 4 men. That was the rumors that were circulating since sometime in the afternoon yesterday. That was what was found. It was not clear, although there were rumors of that as well, that the bodies that were found were not people who we had known to be dead. In other words, when bodies, well, it could easily be, some of the bodies we know that those are dead, and it would be terrible to find out the fact, but it wouldn't be as terrible as what the reality was, which these were 6 people who were alive, a few days ago, and were executed by Hamas. Now, of course, again, you look at the American media, and again, you look at as much as have problems with my government, obviously, as you all know, the American media is worse. Bodies found in Gaza or killed, instead of just straight out murdered by Hamas. That is the facts. It's not an opinion. It's a fact, and they can't say that. They can't. Gutero came out with a comment about feeling bad having met some of the parents, but he couldn't say murdered by Hamas. That's not acceptable, I guess. The terrorists murder people. So just to briefly, I'm sure most of the facts are already out there, but just briefly, in terms of the facts, it seems clear what happened was these people were being held in the same large subterranean tunnel complex where we found the other hostage last week. It's a large complex. They were a kilometer, which is about 3/4 of a mile away from where we found him, but it's an intricate complex of tunnels. And I guess they either panicked or they just made a decision that we were getting too close. And the rule is, that we knew this for a while, that if the Hamas people think we're about to free them, they had to kill their hostages. They killed their hostages, people they were with for all this time. So, we argue is not the right word, but we are sometimes angry at the army in a certain way for not finding and releasing more hostages. But it's very difficult when you think of the situations. They're in tunnels. They're in tunnels that are secured. This is one thing people don't know. They're not long tunnels. They're tunnels with blast doors dividing up the various parts of the tunnel. So in order to move from one part of the tunnel to the other, you have to basically blast the door down. We first can blast the door down, but that sort of limits the ability of secret entries. And the only way to rescue hostages alive is to be able to do it secretly, to surprise the captors. And of course, that's almost impossible in the current circumstances. So this is where we stand. We have not been able to release them. We did not know they were there. Although on some levels, I think from what I understand, and again, I don't know this for sure, we're moving in some way slowly to give them a chance to run away with their hostages. In other words, we did not want to confront them with the hostages because unless we had a plan to free them, you can't just make it up as you go. This is, however good the soldiers may not be, the only way you can do this is careful planning and the right type of soldiers and everything else, and it just doesn't happen accidentally. And so this is where it went at this point. The statements by some of the cabinet members were, let's say, problematic to say the least. Finance Minister Smutrich basically said, this just shows how evil Hamas is. We have to fight Hamas to the very end, and we must unite and fight Hamas. And only military pressure they're going to free the hostages. I think we now know without a doubt that military pressure kills the hostages, I'm afraid, doesn't free them. And on top of which, we have almost nothing else to do. That's part of our problem right now. It's not like, okay, so we went to Rafah. Wonderful, we went into Rafah. We killed some more terrorists in Rafah. Okay, good to kill some terrorists. We destroyed some launching pads. Also a good thing. We destroyed some armaments. Not bad, good things. We also lost 89 soldiers since the announcement of the American/Israeli plan for the hostage, which could have been implemented immediately practically. We lost 89 soldiers, all but like 3 of them in Gaza. So whether 200 or 400 or I don't know how many low-level Hamas fighters worth it, pretty hard for me to make that calculation. I guess the fact that we got death, that was a good thing. And the other assassinations, good things. But is it worth it? Is it worth more hostages dying? And is it worth the fact that our army is being ground tired, very, very tired? At the moment, by the way, we have more troops in the West Bank than we do in Gaza. So I'm not sure what military pressure we're putting on Gaza. We have more troops in the West Bank. What we are doing is we are attacking Hamas targets as they appear from the air. But of course, attacking from the air also increases the chance of civilian casualties. Again, look, in any normal war, if this is a government we're fighting, Hamas would have surrendered. That's the way things go. We captured all the territory. In any normal war, whether they were German Nazis or Japanese or anybody else, we captured the whole place. Governments surrender and try to get help for their civilians. But these people are not interested in that. They're a terrorist organization. And they are interested in, the more civil, the more their civilians suffer, the better it is for them. The better it is for the Palestinian narrative to say more civilians are suffering. Look at these terrible, evil Israelis. They can work to decrease the support for Israel abroad because we're killing civilians. And civilians will keep on dying unless Hamas gives up. Now, we can't unilaterally withdraw without getting back the hostages. Now, I wrote last night about Gernberg's plan. Baskin, sorry, I keep on mentioning the two brothers. Any case, the plan, assuming he's correct, that would require ending the war, which I don't understand why we don't end the war. There's nothing we can do anymore. What exactly is the purpose at this point? We've destroyed as much as we can of the military infrastructure of Hamas. Now, I have to say something that people don't understand, and it took my son last night to make the observation that was very correct. We are living in a post-October 7th, post-trauma, which everything suddenly becomes October 7th. And you talk to people and their children are afraid of October 7th. Children in this country are afraid of being kidnapped in their beds by terrorists. There is a sense that everything that would happen would be another October 7th. So we have to do everything we can to make sure that another October 7th doesn't occur, which I think everybody will agree. Another October 7th cannot occur. But there are two sides to October 7th happening. October 7th would not have happened if there were 5 Apache attack helicopters flying over the border, and there 3,000 people in non-armored vehicles would have been made mincemeat in a matter of an hour. There would have been no one who would have made it through if we would have had 3, 5, whatever number, some number of Apache attack helicopters in the air above the Gaza border, or any other of many different things to defend. They came through and they succeeded because we had no defense at the border. That will never happen again. That will never happen again, period. Will something else happen in 50 years? The same way as the Yom Kippur War, we learned our lessons and then we forgot some of them this time? Yes. I'm quite sure that 50 years from now, some other terrible event, I hope it's only in 50 years, may it only happen in 50 years and may only my grandkids know about it type thing, but may it only be in 50 years. But will something happen again someday? Yes, someday something will happen again, because we'll forget. We won't be, ready as we were. Maybe we'll have peace by then. I don't know. I still dream that could happen, but we can't live our lives because this happened. I mean, yes, we have to keep this in mind, but we can't assume that everything that's going to happen is going to result in another October 7th, because another October 7th is never going to happen unless we let it happen. Now, that means we need to make a lot of changes, but one of the biggest problems with keeping this war going is the fact that no one is, besides all the things that are obvious, hostages, possibility of a war in the north, all those things. Leave all those things aside from them. There are 2 other really big problems. Number one, because the war is still going on, we can't get rid of all the leadership that we currently have. I'm not, yes, obviously Netanyahu, who's going to try his best to stay in office somehow, but all of the leadership of the army needs to go, and they all know it. But beyond that, we need a major rethinking of our security policies. We need to, I'm not even talking about peace and not peace and political. Leave that part aside for 2 seconds. Just in terms of how the army is organized, what size of an army we need, what it has to be made of, what weapons we need, all those things that it required a rethinking, not more of everything. Well, the easiest thing right now is we need more. Yeah, of course, we need more than we have. Maybe we need different than we have. Now, it's a different question, and I'm not positive that we have the bandwidth to do that and to ask those questions. We certainly don't have the bandwidth to ask in the middle of a war. So we need the war to end in order to do those things, to rebuild the army, to rethink our strategies. And of course, look, the biggest problem, and there's no 2 ways around it, and I wrote this in the first week of before the ground war. You don't go to war without a political strategy. And we're 11 months into a war, just about. We're gonna hit the 1-year mark in a really shorter time than we can possibly imagine. And we've never had a political strategy of how we're ending the war. You don't have a war like that. You don't fight a war like that. No one fights a war like that. Even the United States in World War II was unconditional surrender, but it was unconditional surrender of the government. And then there was a realization that some sort of other government would come afterwards at some point. No one thought we would occupy Germany forever. There'll be an occupation for a certain amount of time, and eventually there'll be a new government, which will happen. Same thing in Japan. Other wars, whether it's World War I or every other war, come to a conclusion with a political conclusion. This also has to come to a conclusion somehow. But we'll have the worst possible conclusion because we won't have planned for a conclusion. And again, the same reason, the same group of people, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who have been the ones who have threatened to bring down his government consistently, have not allowed a plan to be put forth because they want us to reoccupy Gaza. They want to resettle Gaza, go back to Gush Katif. And any plan that's a plan is not acceptable to them. So better have no plan than a plan that they won't like. And that's where we are at this point, with no plan, almost 11 months in. And, that's the worst of all worlds. There's no 2 ways about it. Now, the other really disappointing people in all of this is actually the religious parties. Because the religious parties who, they claim to be religious, right? It's quite clear, that the halachic response here is that you do everything you can to uh, save shvuyim, to save prisoners. That's very clear. There's no question about that in terms of Jewish halacha. But it's not quite as important as getting money for the yeshivot. It's not quite as important as many other items. And then Aryeh Deri today came out with a statement after the killings were announced, saying it's a terrible thing that they were killed, etc., etc. But there's no sthira, there's no problem with having a goal of saving the hostages and defeating Hamas. We can do both, which that's just an out. He didn't want to say what needs to be said, and no one's willing to. No one, certainly on the Likud side, etc., except for Gallant, seems to have the backbone to say a thing. So that's where we stand. The situation in the West Bank has gotten considerably worse after many months when things were relatively quiet. First in the northern West Bank, where we've had a 3-4 day activity inside Jenin. After Jenin was a source of a lot of bombs, and that hasn't ended yet. Yesterday I put in the history section what happened in 2002. We're exactly a generation later. The infants of 2002 are the fighters of today. Doesn't make one optimistic, and it's not necessarily our fault. And we can go into that. That's a whole other story, but it's a reality. We need to accept that reality. We have to accept the reality that they hate us. And I don't know me, I'm cynical about our chances of reaching an agreement as much as I want one. So, that's where we stand now. What's happened in the last 2 days and 3 days is the area that it was relatively quiet, which was the southern West Bank, Gush Etzion, Hebron, particularly out of Hebron. We have had 3 attacks in 2 days. We had the Friday night attack on Gush Etzion, on the two car bombs that ended up basically with limited casualties on our side. And then today we had the terrible shooting of a car full of police people on their way to work in the police station in Hebron. They were coming from the Shveilat, Sderot, from the southern area, and they were coming up to Sderot. The oldest policeman killed. It's a tragic story because his daughter was killed, was a policewoman, and was killed on October 7th, fighting to defend Sderot. So now the father was killed by a terrorist on the way to work today in the Hebron. So that situation has gotten considerably worse, let's put it that way. Finally, the north, there was a successful anti-tank attack against one of the villages on the north. One person was seriously wounded and one person was moderately wounded. But there's been a marked decrease in rocket fire by Hezbollah since last Sunday. Now, there can be 2 reasons. They could be both could be correct. One could be military being that combined with our attack on all of the Hezbollah targets on that day, which was a massive attack on our part. We had 100 planes that hit a couple hundred targets, and each target had multiple launchers. We may have eliminated a considerable portion of their immediate launches. They may have a lot more rockets, but they may not have that many more launchers. And as they try to move more launchers into place, we can obviously see them being moved in place and take them out one by one. And of course, it could be political too. A decision by Nasrallah. Look, it's quite clear that he doesn't want all-out war. If he wanted all-out war, he wouldn't have done what he did last Sunday. He would have done something else. So he does not want all-out war. Now, if he doesn't want all-out war, he's under pressure within Lebanon. One of his Christian allies, one major Christian ally yesterday, said Palestine can't be liberated by Lebanon. Lebanon can't be responsible for liberating Palestine, which is creating a certain level of pressure on him domestically. He sees himself as the defender of Lebanon, and so that's that. So he may be willing to pull back. The last thing I have to say, and I wrote this for tonight, it drove me crazy this morning with a bunch of people who took the statements by both President Biden, Vice President Harris, which were after midnight in Washington. This came after hours before Netanyahu managed to get out a statement, and then basically said, "But they didn't want us to go to Rafiah." You see, so they were terrible. They wanted us not to go to Rafiah. Now, I didn't, and I don't, for the moment, understand the logic of why, based on the news of today, it was a good thing to go to Rafiah. Now, I think that the reasons they gave for us not to going to Rafiah were wrong. In other words, their reasons for not going to Rafiah was they were afraid of civilian casualties. Well, that was wrong. The number of civilian casualties in Rafah seems to be very small, relatively speaking. Their reasoning was wrong. But the other reasoning was to end the war. And if we would have ended the war back in May, go back, these people would be alive, and probably a few other hostages would be alive, and 80 something of our soldiers would be alive. And so they were right for the wrong reasons, but they were certainly not wrong. In other words, what happened today doesn't prove them to be wrong. The fact that we're there, what has it done for us? If we've killed some more Hamas people, is it worth it? Don't get me wrong. I'm not about to become a Hamas supporter or nothing. If we could push a button and kill them all in 1 minute, I'm all in favor. But there's a cost involved, and there's no easy way, and there's no easy solution. Okay, we're about at the time I ask for questions. We only have 15 minutes. We'll see if people have questions today. So raise your hand if you want questions. Hopefully I'll see you, or my wife will and yell at me. So, Michael Ross.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, can.
The statistics about the casualties in Gaza are always from the Hamas Health Ministry. Where is it? Where is this Hamas Health Ministry? I mean, presumably you can't go to an office block in Gaza, knock on the door, and it's the Hamas Health Ministry. What is it?
It's whatever the Hamas spokesman, they're a Hamas spokesman, basically. Look, there is an acceptance in Israel that their numbers are probably inflated by 20 to 30%, because there are numbers that are based on hospital reporting, and there's what's called self-reporting, people who report people who are dead or whatever. And those numbers are not very accurate. The people coming from the hospital reported by hospitals, there seems to be somebody sitting somewhere with a computer and tallying these things.
But in Gaza, or in the West Bank, or where?
Probably in Gaza. Someone sitting in Gaza. Electricity, the Gazans have electricity, and it doesn't come necessarily from a system. They have generators, and they have solar, and so they have computers, they have communications. Where he's sitting, I could be in a tunnel for all we know. Again, listen. Look, understand there are two sets of problems here. There is no question that their numbers are higher than their real numbers, but there's no question a lot of people are dead. That's the reality. A lot of people are dead. The numbers are higher than they should be, and what should never be. These Western news reports don't even report the Hamas health ministry when the bombings occur. They report immediately. Hamas announces 200 dead. Only later it trickles down that the Hamas hospital, etc., there are only 35 dead, and of course 33 of them were males between the ages of 18 and 33. So okay, yes, 33 are dead. One of the things that we keep on seeing is the most problematic thing in the last couple of days has been the numbers that are coming out of Jenin. How many people are dead? 18 people dead. Well, guess what? We're reporting 18 people dead too. We're just reporting that 18 of them are terrorists. So yeah, 18 are dead. Now, I'm not saying it's good, bad, or not that 18 are dead. It's probably bad. Well, it's a mixture. For terrorists, it's okay, but leave that part aside. The problem with Western media is, again, they report too quickly. They report the numbers way too quickly. And worst case, and the worst situation for everything and this people involved in fighting the media is the people sitting on the social media desks, the people setting out the push notifications. The push notifications are the worst because they're the initial numbers. They're higher than the actual numbers ever are. But 98% of the people see the push notifications that come on their phones and never read the article, and certainly not the article even 3 hours later that has the real number. But they see the push notification, and that's the most problematic number of all. And if we want to fight what's going on in the media, first thing we need to do is concentrate on people in charge of push notifications. Lisa.
Thanks, but my question really is, who is the Hamas health ministry? Are they doctors? Are they administrators? I mean, it seems
there is probably some doctors in the health ministry. Look, let's step back a second. Before this, there was a real health ministry in Gaza. There are hospitals in Gaza. They had to be administered. They were infiltrated and run by Hamas, but they were taking care of patients. I'm sure medicines had to be ordered. There were all sorts of things. It was a government it may have been a corrupt government. It may have been a government controlled by terrorists, but it was a government. And I'm quite sure there were doctors involved in the health ministry. They were involved in ordering medicines and deciding all these sort of things that doctors do. Even in the worst regimes in the world, there are health ministries. It doesn't make a difference. They're terrible. I mean, excuse me, Nazi Germany had health ministries too. They may have also been in charge of euthanasia of people, but there was a health ministry in Nazi Germany. So they're real. They're people. They're sitting on computers, no doubt. They may be inflating the numbers, but they're real. I mean, that's the least of our problems, who they really are. The numbers are false, but not crazy false. Way too many women and children, not enough men. They're falsified in that direction. But, again, it's a question of whose sources you accept. Lisa, Ada.
I was just going to ask, in terms of destroying the tunnels, obviously they're not filling them in with, dirt and concrete and stuff like that. Since they were dug in the first place, is it easier for Hamas once they regain control of the territory to rebuild them because they existed before, or are they really, really destroyed, to your knowledge?
Look, most of them being destroyed by being blown up. By being blown up, it means that they collapse on themselves. The soil in Gaza, as opposed to Lebanon, there are tunnels in Lebanon as well. The Lebanese tunnels are done through rock, and it's much more difficult to destroy a rock tunnel because rock tunnels are, the rock itself acts as a container. The tunnels in Gaza are built through soft dirt, and they're reinforced with wood and sometimes concrete to keep the dirt out. My assumption is that if we blow them up, that blows out the reinforcements. Will it be easy to rebuild them? I said maybe they know the direction. They know whatever engineering problems. If we haven't killed, hopefully, a lot of the engineers who were responsible for building them. I don't know. It's going to be a challenge, and I assume they're going to rebuild some. Look, we have been fighting Hamas since the 1990s. Hamas started their bombing around the time of the Oslo peace accords when they wanted to stop Oslo because Hamas did not believe in two-state solution. So we've been fighting Hamas since then. The idea that we were going to wipe out Hamas now is not going to happen. We might have been able to put an alternative government in Gaza if that would have been our plan. But since the only alternative government that was possible would have involved the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian Authority is a no-no for part of the government's coalition, it wasn't going to happen. So that's where we stand. Michael.
Thank you, Mark. Yesterday in your report, you had a piece by Naftali Bennett, who was talking about Israelis who are actively looking for basically a way to leave Israel and, put it bluntly, jump ship. So I wonder if you could comment on that, because it seems as though the strategy of Hamas is basically to make Israel unlivable, and for people who have the means to leave Israel, to start leaving Israel. So, what's your observation on that?
Okay, it's a serious problem. Let's start with that. The calculation in this country is that 50,000 people who are the backbone of the economy. If the 50,000 leave, the country will economically collapse completely. Those 50,000 are the people who are easiest to leave. Most of them could get a job in a minute in Silicon Valley or wherever else, and they'll get a special visa, whatever else is necessary. So it's a real problem. I can't say that I've run into too many people who have not talked about it. It's not because of Hamas, it's because of the government. It's because of a feeling that we're in a government that we can't do anything about. It's the fear that the religious will be taking over the country, and the demographics are such that there's no future with the demographics the way they are going forward in the medium and long term. Of course, that people, the immediate fear, it's rather astounding to me. I look at this as this is the fourth Sunday since the rocket, since we assassinated in Beirut and theoretically assassinated in Tehran. The first week we all stayed really close to our homes. The second week I went with my son to an indoor pool not too far from our house, and we thought about it all the time, well, what's going to be, where do we go in case there's, a rocket attack. By this week, I've been making it a regular every Sunday to go. It didn't occur to me. It was not an issue anymore. Partly because Hezbollah's thing so fizzled, but the Iranian thing is yet to come. So on one hand, there's accumulation. Those week or two were difficult weeks in the sense that you worried. There was always a level of uncertainty during those 2 weeks. But now it's more of a question of the government. And there is a sense that if we can't put in a normal government in the next election, whenever that is, and no longer until it is, the worse it's going to become, that the future of this country is just not rosy, let's put it that way. And that will result in a significant number of people leaving. Now, the problem is, I was speaking to one of my close friends, and, he said, well, where would you go at this point? Leaving aside, I obviously have an easy way of going, but I have no intention of going. But, where in the world do you go? The situation, quite honestly, in the United States does not look rosy in the medium-term future. It could change, things could become better, but right now it does not look rosy. Most of Europe doesn't look like a place a Jew wants to go at the moment. The most depressing thing I saw was an article about the Jews of New Zealand and the amount of anti-Semitism they're suddenly happening. And there was a song in the 70s or 80s to become a New Zealander. That was the idea, escape from New Zealand. And so I had said to one of my friends who has traveled there, I said, why don't you buy us all a house back? This before I read that article, why don't you buy us a house in New Zealand so we have a place to go? So there's, for Jews, in some levels, when you look at the world, maybe this is it. This is the last stand. I don't know. But it's a concern. It's a real concern. It's a real concern of what the future will be. We have a demographic disaster going forward, with the ultra-Orthodox becoming a larger and larger number. The national religious have also grown because both of them have a higher birth rate than everybody else. And it's a real concern. And for those of us who are, liberal democracy is the country we want to live in, liberal, democratic, and Jewish, it's a challenge. And it's a challenge for more and more people. And it's not clear how people are going to navigate that challenge. So it's a real problem. It's a real issue. So that's where we stand. Any other questions? We got 1 or 2 minutes left if there's a quick question. Otherwise, next, somebody?
Yes, I have a question. There'll maybe be 100,000, 200,000 people protesting Netanyahu this evening. Netanyahu's probably home in Caesarea watching a European soccer match. Is there any chance in that country, in Israel, which I love and have lived in, that there could be a military coup?
No. Two reasons why there can't be a military coup. One, it's just not as part of the national character. You know, I was listening to a discussion an hour or two ago of, you know, why none of the people who are so upset at Netanyahu wearing uniform don't just leave the leave the army or leave the Mossad or wherever it is, and then speak their minds. And it's not the character. There's no character of military coup. It's something very much against the whole character of the country. Then beyond all of that, there are too many Netanyahu supporters in the government, in the military. The national religious have done a very good job of infiltrating the military in ways that the lower level commanders wouldn't follow the coup, even if there was one. I'm not suggesting there should be a coup, mind you. I'm just telling you what the reality is. So I don't know. You know, we really have how you get rid of Netanyahu is a real challenge. A man that should have resigned, shouldn't have run because he was indicted, should have resigned or at least taken responsibility, but refuses to take responsibility for October 7th and seems to think he can rehabilitate himself. Now, mind you, that 82% of the public, 82% of the public stated that they want a national board of inquiry to what took place on October 7th. He is working his hardest to delay such a national board of inquiry. I believe what number it was, 68% of the public thinks he should retire, not run again. Only 20% think he should run again. But our electoral system is so messed up that if he gets 25% of the vote, he can still end up being prime minister. So it's not a positive look. And I'm not really thrilled with a lot of the alternatives, to be honest with you. Not they all wouldn't be better, but they all have their own problems. Okay, folks, my next time I'll be in New York for the next session in 2 weeks.
Mark?
Yes.
It's Michael later. Neither of these are pressing. If you just wrapping things up because you have to go, completely understand. But if nobody else had any questions, I've been trying to ask one, but my video feed doesn't seem to work that much. It keeps freezing. So do you have time or you've had enough?
I gotta leave it in 2 minutes. Go ahead.
All right. Two totally unrelated questions. Pick one, pick both, or just save it for another day. You have engineer. I'm not an engineer. You're not an engineer, but you have engineering blood in your body. One of the things that surprised Israel was how big the tunnels were, where they were, that there were so many of them, maybe an order of magnitude more than they suspected. What little I know about tunnel building from the movie The Great Escape, one of the problems, if you have to keep it secret, is how do you hide the dirt? How did they manage? I mean, with all the eyes in the skies, the drones and the satellites and things like that, they managed to do that and surprise Israel that much. And I guess the other thing is, I just haven't seen this in the news. They started recruiting Hasidim or Haradeh. 3,000 were supposed to show up the first day. Many did not. Has anyone done anything to enforce this, or they just basically gave up that there's nothing they can do about it?
Two parts. Remember something. In The Great Escape, the problem was the Nazi people would come in and inspect the building all the time. When you're running a country, when you're running an area and you have building sites all over the place, you know, you're building at the same time that you're building these tunnels. Who's going to know where the dirt came from the building you just built or the tunnel you just built under it? So it's a much other thing. Listen, I also don't think I have a lot of questions on how good our aerial surveillance was of Gaza. I think it was not the way it should be. And I think to this day it's not. We don't have enough drones. You know, there was it said, where did I hear it yesterday, that Ukraine is producing 20,000 drones a month. Israel has just put an order in. I think said for 30,000 drones. It will take us many years to build them. So maybe it's time to rethink what we're doing. We don't have enough drones. We're not using them in the way we should. And that's a whole other story that goes back to what I said earlier about rethinking our strategies, etc. The second question was, remind me, Michael?
The Haradeh who didn't show up.
Okay, so they sent out draft notices not to 3,000. The goal was to get 3,000. They sent out about 1,000. They got about 52 showing up so far. They have not done anything. They're trying to avoid a major showdown. Go back to the point number one. They don't want to lose the coalition. They don't want, so they're playing it very close, trying to see if they can get people to come. It's a real problem. Look, the only thing we can do is turn off all their money. It's the only thing we can do is turn off all their money. But we're not so far. We've turned off some money because the Supreme Court has required us to turn off some of the money. So, so that's where we stand.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, wait, I see this. I should just see if I'm supposed to agree to some question here. And my wife is pointing out, I'm not looking at the Laura. Okay, so that's a hard question, Laura. Whether the question was whether what the U.S. should do in terms of Netanyahu stalling. It's difficult in the sense that sometimes by going up against Netanyahu, you give him more political power by going up against him. On the other hand, I think if you believe that Netanyahu is what's stopping an agreement from taking place, then I think you can say it. You should say it because it'll help. It'll help bring out more Israelis. It'll get more people angry. But you don't give them cover. Let me put it that way. Well, let's put it that way. You don't give them cover. But again, it's a difficult situation because you're in the middle of an election year. This group of the Democratic administration is trying to walk a fine line, which is a very, very difficult line for them to walk. And so by being more critical of Israel, it's going to make it more difficult, especially over this issue, as opposed to the death of Palestinian civilians. So it's not easy. It's not an easy line to walk. But I don't know. Look, I don't know what can be done. That is the problem, because the issue really comes down to, and this I want to finish on this. The issue comes down to his overwhelming and single his single concern is staying in power. Nothing else makes any difference to him. Up to, I would say nothing else. I mean, if it was between staying in power and the guaranteed destruction of Israel, well, he wouldn't stay in power if Israel was destroyed. So he would maybe do something. But anything less than that, he will take the route of staying in power. That is very clear. And so the question is, what scenario can you build to get him off that point? Or is there any way you can get 5 people from this government to agree to go against him? Bribe them. I don't know. I mean, CIA used to be good at bribing people. I mean, bring that back. I'm not being serious, but those are the sort of things we need to find a way of getting 5 people to suddenly get the courage to go against them when they know it's wrong. That's the thing. That's insane. You don't think Aryeh Deri doesn't know it's wrong? Of course he knows it's wrong. But he won't go against him because he's electoral support and all sorts of other things. These people won't do it. They won't go up against him. Maybe he has something on all of them. I don't know. He's very good. Now, the other thing, and I'll make this last point, he's very, very good. They've had what they call in Hebrew, machanot ral, which is a poison machine, which is whenever somebody comes out against Netanyahu, on the internet and WhatsApp, whenever people are attacked mercilessly. Israel Channel 14 makes Fox News seem tame and being in support of the Democrats as opposed to post anything else. It's a terrible thing, Israel Channel 14. It's basically close to Newsmax, except it has a wide amount of Israelis watch it these days. I-24 News in Hebrew, its biggest successful day, and I-24 is not as far right as 14, but it is probably to the right of some of the other channels. Its big success is on Saturday because 14 is not on, so more people watch I-24. I'm talking about Hebrew right now, not the English, on Saturday than any other day because the other channels, the right wing channel 14 isn't on, and this is at least considered a little more to the right. Okay, at any rate, I thank you all for being here. Be on again in 2 weeks. I hope some of you will attend one of my three events. taking place in Westchester in New Jersey and in Elmira, New York. So, and some of you hopefully I'll see in person as friends and whatever else. So have a good 2 weeks. Hopefully there won't be any emergencies. I don't know. It's difficult to know.